This episode is brought to you by Peak Performers. What if the talent your team needs has been there all along, but you simply have not had a way to find it? Peak Performers helps organizations tap into a powerful and often overlooked talent pool. Professionals with disabilities. These are people who bring resilience, creativity, and strong problem solving skills to their work and who stay longer once hired. For more than 30 years, Peak has combined smart recruiting tools with genuine human connection to help organizations hire more inclusively and effectively. Learn how they can help you build stronger teams at peakperformers.org. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast. I'm your host, executive coach, speaker, and author, Marcel Schwantes. I believe that when we show up with our full humanity to work and lead from a place of love, joy, purpose, care, and inclusion, it's going to make a radical difference in your leadership, your business, and your bottom line. This is a show about actionable, practical love, the verb, as a leadership and business strategy. Let's get rolling. Hey gang, welcome back. Glad you're here. I'm excited about today's episode because, well, today is a special CEO spotlight. You know, now and then we feature executives and founders of growing purpose-driven companies that are aligned with the Love in Action movement. And we think you should know about them and, how they lead their organizations so you can level up your leadership, your culture, and even maybe how you operate as a business. There are a lot of great lessons for leaders and business owners looking to scale in today's episode. So in just a few minutes, I'm going to be speaking with Bree Sarlati. Bree is the president and CEO of Peak Performers. Let me tell you first a little bit about Peak Performers before I introduce our guest, okay? Peak Performers is a nonprofit staffing agency that champions professionals with disabilities. So for more than 3 decades, Peak has helped thousands of Texans find meaningful work, earning the trust of state agencies and public sector partners across the region. And now they're expanding nationally and scaling its impact by integrating modern recruiting technology, of course, while staying grounded in the relationships that built its reputation. So guided by an agile, human-centered approach that they call talent without limits, Peak ensures that growth never comes at the expense of connection. I love that. So known for its service, integrity, and values-driven mission, Peak Performers demonstrates how organizations can lead with purpose while building workplaces where everyone belongs. Bree Sarlati is a pragmatic strategist known for turning complexity into clarity. After years of serving professionals with disabilities across Texas, Bree led the organization into the national expansion that we're seeing now by modernizing operations, embracing new technology, and scaling the mission beyond state borders. Her focus on agility ensures that even as Peak grows, it never loses the human touch that defines its work. Bree has a talent for spotting potential that other people miss and for connecting people with opportunities that move them forward. Passionate about disability employment and gender equity in leadership, she champions fair, future-ready systems and brings clarity, curiosity, and a people-first approach when the stakes are high. And I'm honored that Bree Sarlati is here, and she now joins us. Bree, welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you. So delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we start this way. You ready?
Yeah.
What's your story?
All right. Well, my story is that when I was very young, I knew that I loved stories. I was always an avid reader. I still am. In fact, I just this past weekend hit my reading goal for the year, which was 50 books. It's the second year in a row that I've been able to pull that one off. Actually, a funny little side story that at the beginning of November, I looked at my reading and I was like, okay, I'm at book 39 out of 50. Like, I don't think I'm going to make it this year. The cards just weren't lined up for that. But I was like, okay, so I could either say that's good enough and I'm just going to focus on reading things that bring me joy for the remainder of the year, or I can go through my library and find all of the shortest books that I own and just read those exclusively for the next 2 months. So guess which one I did. So that's I've been reading 2 books a weekend. But anyways, I love reading. I love fiction, of course, but I love nonfiction in the context of
Mm.
business reading. But I've just always been drawn to stories. I love listening to stories. I dabbled with being a writer at one point in my life. And what it ultimately came down to was when I was about 8 years old, I learned the word anthropology.
Oh,
And then I learned how to spell it too, which is also pretty cool. Not an easy one. And what I've always been drawn to is understanding people. And I just have this sort of insatiable curiosity about everyone around me. I love getting to know everyone's stories, but also what their values are, what motivates them, what their dreams are, all those kinds of things. Um, so my goal in life was to become an anthropologist,
mm.
which is like an academic. That's a long, long career academic path to go there. And then when I was so in throughout my growing up years, when everyone else was changing their trajectory of what they wanted to do and why, I was very, very strong with keeping with that anthropology focus. One track mind. I'm also a very stubborn person, so maybe that was it too. So I ended up going to a little college in southern Vermont called Bennington. It's a tiny school that basically no one has heard of. When I started there, I think that the total size of the school is about 450 students. It's a school that was the opposite of where I went to high school. It's like you've got no grades, you have no majors technically, like you design your own plan with a capital P, and you put together a team of professors who help you figure out essentially what you want to study and why and how that's going to drive your future. So what's also unique about Bennington is that they do something called a field work term, where every year, and the school's in southern Vermont. You can imagine being in southern Vermont in January and February is a little bit grim, very dark, very cold. So the school shuts down for all of January and February, essentially, and the students are required to go out into the world and do something like an internship. And most kids there they go back home. They might work for a local theater company or in their family business or something like that. But not me. I decided that I was going to make life really interesting and challenging for myself. And I went abroad all 4 fieldwork terms. The first 2 years, I went to India. I had been there as part of a high school graduation trip with my dad when I was 18. So I went there when I was 19. I went there when I was 20. And each of these times was for about 2 months at a time. And then I had kind of had my fill of India. I had also gotten sick a number of times. So I needed a little bit of a biological reset. But during that time, I had been learning Hindi. I had been really involved in the culture of the communities in northern India where I was staying and living. But I needed something new, and I got really interested in Lebanon, of all places, in the Middle East. So the year here was about 2010. And not many people had actually heard of Lebanon or could find it on a map, even in a really educated community like at Bennington. So my first year, I went to Beirut and I did an internship with an anthropologist, and that was fantastic. And then the next year, I said I'm going to go back. I actually stayed in a little village up in the mountains, and interviewed people for 2 months and learned the local dialect. And it culminated in a senior year project for me on the topic of language and social identity in Lebanon with a modern Maronite village as a case study.
Wow.
So talk about really, really hyper specialized and focused, but I loved it. So I spent my whole year working on this senior thesis, and it ended up being an 85-page paper. And when I turned it in the day of college graduation, I had a realization, which was that the things that I had spent the last year working on, it was academically fascinating, perhaps, but such a specialized audience for that, right? I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
So not only that, but I saw my future ahead of me and where I could continue doing things that were really academically interesting, but what impact was that going to have in the real world? How is that going to touch real people? And um, I realized that it wasn't going to have the kind of impact that I wanted to have for my life. So then it was like a gaping chasm in front of me of, okay, if I'm not going to do this thing I've wanted to do since I was 8 years old, and now I'm 21, just graduated college, what am I going to do now? So I ended up wandering around, figuratively and literally, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And in that time period, I tried different things. Like that was when I dabbled with becoming a writer, did random things like learn to play the piano better and all kinds of different things. And then I wound up doing a historic preservation program through AmeriCorps in West Virginia. It's a very specialized type of AmeriCorps program that they have there that focuses on historic preservation. And essentially, my task was to work in this little tiny town in West Virginia in the mountains and to try to grow the programming and the online presence for this museum. Because a little known fact is that this site in West Virginia is the site of the first land battle of the American Civil War.
Wow.
So I got to learn more random knowledge. I'm just a font of wealth for the early Civil War history in that area. And I was there and doing the AmeriCorps thing, and then did that for a year, and then decided that I was ready to move on and also kind of ready to grow up. So I had met my now husband in the course of being there in West Virginia for that year, and we were trying to figure out what to do next. And in the meantime, my parents had been trying to get me to come back to Texas and work for Peak Performers. So Peak was started by my father, Charlie, in 1994. And I had obviously no intention of ever working in the business, let alone taking over the business. But I guess that's one of the many curveballs that life can throw at us. So I ended up moving back here, and I started as a IT sourcer, essentially. And I got to learn IT recruiting, and I learned that I had a lot of fun with it, was really good at it, and that even when it's hard, it's enjoyable because, bringing it full circle, it's all about people's stories. And so that's the common thread that I feel like it's not so random that I wound up doing what I'm doing, is that in the world of recruiting, we're all about learning people's stories and seeing how, by the opportunities that we have, the people that we're connected to, how we can help advance their own life stories and their own trajectories in ways that are beneficial to them.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love interviewing people. I still do. I joke that I'm our chief recruiter because I fill almost all of our internal positions by going out and finding individuals with the exact right skill set that we need to complement existing skills on our team. And that's one of the things that I love about what we do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was interesting. How you weaved all that together and brought it full circle. That's lovely. You are a storyteller. That's a skill. So I mentioned peak performance in my introduction, but I want to hear it in your own words now, because you've gone through the company inside out, from being an internet researcher to now you're heading up the company. So in your own words, how would you describe the business, the company, and what you do in the world?
hmm So when I started full-time at Peak a little over 10 years ago, I did project-based work before that, but full-time a little over 10 years ago. And I've done every job in the company here. I've also created a lot of the jobs that exist here now, which is a great privilege to have done that. Well, when I started here, for one, we were entirely paper with our processes. So that was one of my first challenges in a leadership role. I was like, the future is now, people. We implemented our first ATS, and we're still with that same system. So I'd consider that a success, you know. Um, but the other major part of that was our mission as a nonprofit has always been to set a higher standard of employment for people with disabilities. So I want to talk about that sentence right there for a minute, because it's very intentional wording. The world of disability employment 30 years ago is not so different from how it is today. In fact, sometimes when I'm going through my dad's old files, I'll find like research studies that they did 30 years ago to try to figure out how to brand themselves and stuff. And I look at it and I go, wow, not a lot has changed, unfortunately, in terms of the hesitation that employers can have around hiring people with disabilities or the skepticism around what kinds of skills people with disabilities can really bring to the table. So the status quo for disability employment has shifted a lot over the years because a long time ago there was no such thing as disability employment. The status quo was unemployment, but in this sort of modern era in this country, there have been things like sheltered workshops, which are places where people with same or similar kinds of disabilities are in an environment doing very specific kinds of tasks. Usually those are manual kinds of unskilled or minimally skilled labor. And I want to be careful, and I don't knock those organizations or those jobs in any way, because I think that those have a very valuable place in our society and in the complex world of employment for people with disabilities. And for the people who provide those jobs and they are great quality, that is phenomenal. But Peak was founded for a slightly different purpose. It's that higher standard piece of our mission statement, which really means that we're going to say, hey, let's see how we can create jobs that fill the gap where if I'm an individual with a disability, if I have a professional skill set or want to find work in an office environment and I'm qualified to do that, the status quo is still in this country that you're on your own in trying to do that. There is a don't ask, don't tell assumption, which is that employers don't want to know if you have a disability, and employees are generally not encouraged to disclose that information. The statistics on how many people disclose that information, it's a needle that barely shifts over the years. It's still way less than 10%, let's say broadly, like it depends on which source you're looking at, but broadly speaking, less than 10%. Which is a big gap when you consider that the CDC says that a quarter of the American adult population has a disability. So the jobs that we do all will take place in an office environment. Overwhelmingly, they are professional roles, which we are very, very proud of. It represents a lot of trust that we have built with our customers in our ability as their staffing provider to be able to provide qualified talent to them for high stakes, high visibility kinds of roles. But it also is a testament to shifting people's perceptions on what it means to be a skilled professional who also happens to have a disability.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so many things I want to discuss with you and cover. I want to know about how you've led Peak with agility, something that I've touched in my introduction. And that's going to be a theme throughout, I think, our conversation, how you've adapted to change as you've gone through all these inflection points with the market shifting, et cetera, and how do we build a truly inclusive teams now that we're in 2026, right? So, and I want to talk to you also about how you scaled Peak without losing the human connection, okay? Because that's
Mhm.
really important because so often as we go through a fast period of growth, we hit that inflection point and we lose our humanity, right? I
Oh,
see
yeah.
in startups, right? And they lose their true north. But you were able to safeguard human connection as you expanded. So I'd love to hear more about that. And folks, that's setting a table for you guys. So Bree and I are going to dive into these discussion points after this message from our sponsor. Hang tight. Let me share a quick story that Bree Sarlati told me when we first spoke about peak performers. She described a candidate who had been overlooked for years because traditional hiring systems filtered them out. But once placed, that individual became one of the strongest problem solvers on the team and stayed longer than anyone expected. That story captures what Peak does best. Peak Performers is a nonprofit staffing agency that helps organizations tap into remarkable untapped talent, professionals with disabilities who bring creativity, adaptability, any natural ability to navigate challenges. Employers consistently report that these individuals not only excel in their roles, but also deliver greater retention, which has become invaluable in today's labor market. Peak blends modern recruiting technology with deep human centered listening to find potential others often miss. They have been trusted by public sector agencies for more than 3 decades and are now expanding nationally to serve private sector partners who want a workforce that is both inclusive and high performing. If your organization is ready for a smarter, more human approach to hiring, visit peakperformers.org and discover how their talent without limits model can strengthen your team. Okay, I think you have a lot to teach us here, Bree. So I'll start with this one. What would you say are the biggest challenges organizations face right now? Maybe what challenges did you face when trying to scale your teams, quickly, but without losing that personal connection?
Yes, that is a really, really important question, I think. Um, and one of the things that I read years ago, so I mentioned I'm a big reader, right? And that includes, I love reading leadership books. You can see a whole range of them behind me. In fact, True North is the title of a book on my shelf behind me. Um, but I read something years ago about how, um, and this is founders, right? But I'm not a founder, but still CEOs, leaders in general, need to have enough self-awareness to recognize within themselves if they have the skills that are needed to take the organization to where it needs to go. And that's something that I latched onto many years ago. And so that has continued to be my focus. And I'm fascinated when I read stories of, a founder saying, you know what, I'm going to hire a CEO. It's not the case for Peak, right? That's not our path right now. But I'm fascinated with how a CEO needs to always be looking inward at themselves and saying, what skills do I have, or what skills do I need to add to take this organization to where I want it to go? So I think that's an important starting point when we look at things like agility, is that it all starts with the leader and that ability to be introspective and to ask yourself the hard questions before you can ask them of others almost.
Yeah. I want to come back a little bit to disability. And, I think, tell me if this is true, that a lot of companies often misunderstand about disability inclusive hiring. So, talk us through what that misunderstanding is.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad we should start there. Absolutely. So, one of our challenges in the work that we do is that everyone is walking around out there with their own definitions of what a disability is and disability isn't, including individuals who have disabilities. And this is one of the challenges for the disabled community in general, is, and has been historically, is that we all got to be in this fight together. Like, just because I have this type of disability and you might have a different one, and we have different barriers that we might face in our daily lives, we're all advocating together for a future that's better for everyone. So in our definition of disability, we go by the ADA, the ADAAA. So that includes a lot of things that people do not generally see as a disability, but they are under law considered a disability in this country. I love talking with someone and they go, "Oh, well, I don't know if I know anyone with a disability." And then you start listing them off and they go, "Oh, I didn't know that was one," or, "Oh, I have that." So one of the most common ones that people don't realize as a disability, for instance, is things like ADHD and ADD. Because our this is a good thing, right? Our society has changed where we talk about those kinds of conditions. We talk about the kinds of challenges that individuals with those conditions might face. It's kind of been normalized, including increasingly with mental health conditions and the normalization of talking about those. However, like, we have to still know that there are stigmas that still exist. There are biases. And so our focus as an organization is often educating people on what a disability is and isn't, and also drawing forth whatever those biases are and helping people overcome them sort of in real time in many cases, and help them understand that one person's experience with a disability can also be different, very different from someone else's,
Yeah.
even if they have the same disability.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to start talking about, how you lead and maybe get into some business processes. And I already mentioned the agile way of, maybe improving systems and processes. And you're big on that. So I want to
Oh
find
yeah,
out,
speaking
first
my
of all,
language.
yeah, good. Let's go down that route. But the thing is that a lot of people also misunderstand what building agile human-centered teams looks like. So explain exactly what that is.
Yeah, it's amazing in an organization what happens when you try to change things. And this is something that I've seen repeatedly over the last 10 years. There's like again, giving a book example, the whole who moved my cheese, right? I thought that my target was here. Now you're telling me it's different. Or I've always thought my job was this, and now you're telling me it's different. But I think that that's a really important skill set for everyone to have. And I think it's going to be even more important going down into the future, and looking at disruptions that AI and other technology will bring to organizations and to all of our lives. So I mentioned that when I started at Peak, we were entirely paper. That was literally how our staff organized their lives, and the big challenge, the big hurdle that I faced with the first time when I tried to make things digital, was also to say, hey, we're not going to have people come in and interview with us in person anymore. Like we had the very, register with a staffing company, like a very old-fashioned kind of model. And this wasn't that long ago. This was basically a couple of years before the pandemic. So when I said, but it's costing us a lot of time in providing the candidates to our clients, if we're having to wait those couple of days for someone to come in and interview with us in person, and then they have to figure out how to drive here and the parking and da da da, and that's really costly. We're missing out on chances to present people who are qualified to our clients. So the biggest hesitation that our staff had at the time was, I don't know how I'm going to ever put someone to work who I haven't met. Like that was a really big cognitive barrier for us to overcome together. But then you look at, we made that change in about 2018, I think it was. But if we hadn't made that change, if we were still trying to operate that way when the pandemic hit in 2020, we would have been in a world of hurt.
Mm.
So it's not just about the agility in terms of what works now, but agility as a practice itself, because all that we can know for certain is that things will continue to change. And
Yeah.
so we have to be prepared from a mindset, as well as structurally, as well as organizationally. We have to be prepared to be agile and to constantly shift and work together through those shifts.
Yeah, and a lot of the shifts also require technology, and you're a CEO that embraces technology, right? So, and you have to because you're in the recruiting industry. I mean, so you've had
Mhm.
to integrate today's recruiting technology to help scale and stay agile. But I think the point that a lot of CEOs miss is that you've done all that not at the expense of humanity, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that a little bit. So why do so many organizations really kind of struggle to have that balance, balancing technology, process improvement with the human touch that, well, at the end of the road, that's what's going to drive engagement and drive success.
Yeah. So, the staffing industry has an unfortunate reputation for often being transactional. It's like, hey, we've got a bunch of jobs that we need to fill. We need to get bodies in those jobs, and it's a very dehumanizing sort of approach. Um, so we are very intentional in how we work at Peak in terms of how our staff approach our candidates, but also even down to how we operationalize that through technology and process, where we stay focused on the candidate. That these are individuals who are going through one of the most stressful experiences of their lives, which is trying to find a job. Like that is, I think the statistics are that like it's finding a job or being unemployed and moving. Like these are some major disruptions in our lives that can cause huge psychological distress to people.
Yeah.
So that's a time when we should be very, very aware of what people's human level needs are when they're looking for a job and they're hoping for someone to help them through that process, which is where we come in, right? So what I see, especially with the advent of things like the voice AI enabled screenings, the interviewing platforms, um, there's they've been very much in vogue in the staffing industry for the last really they've picked up steam in the last 2 years, and these tools are getting better, right? So they can look and sound a little bit more like a human and less like a robot, but still fundamentally it doesn't satisfy the purpose of creating connection, to feel like if I'm a job seeker, I know that there is a person on the other end of this relationship who is trying to create opportunities for me or advance my cause in some way by finding me a job.
Mm.
So when we focus on how we can integrate technology into our processes, I'm very adamant in saying we're going to make sure that we preserve that human connection. Because even though, from a pure numbers standpoint, you could say recruiters spend a lot of their time on the phone. So if we take them off the phones, if we outsource that to AI, then just imagine all the other time, we can have less recruiters, all that kind of stuff. But we take a different approach, which is that we're going to figure out how we can work smarter on the administrative tasks that have to happen in the background. Those are the system automation kind of opportunities that do not get in the way of the human relationships. And actually, they give our recruiters more time to spend on the phone, talking with someone, connecting with them on a human level, on a job seeker and recruiter level.
Yeah. You just gave some amazing tips because I was gonna segue into my next question, which is, speaking to the hiring managers, the HR people, right? How can they build more agile hiring systems that move fast while still keeping the relationships, right? While not hurting the support that should be at the center of that recruiting process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When another example that exists in I think all businesses is this whole thing about scheduling. Like, oh, let's schedule a time to talk. And then we've all been on those email threads. They are so painful, right? Where, hey, I'm available this time this day. Does that work for you? Oh, no, now we're trying to coordinate with multiple people. Now we're working through someone's assistant to try to coordinate. Like, that's a perfect example of something that is so inefficient. So we're like, oh, hey, let's use a recruiting scheduling link so that you can schedule time to speak with me. So those are the kinds of things that all that back and forth, it doesn't build relationship necessarily. It's just pain. It's just friction in a process. So those are the things that I recommend focusing on, like what can we do to make this, to reduce the friction here so that again, we're spending more time actually on the things that count, which is often connecting with other people.
Love that. Love that. All right. So I'm curious, how does Peak Performers now leverage human connections to scale its impact?
So I mentioned earlier in a question there, I mentioned our mission statement, setting a higher standard of employment for people with disabilities, right? And how over the years that has come to mean more professionals with disabilities because that is our specialty and a lot of the skill sets that our customers trust us with. But I used to joke that here it was like we had these little asterisks underneath our mission statement, which was, well, if they happen to live in Austin, Texas, and if they happen to want to work for the government in Texas, right? So we operated within like a niche and a niche and a niche. And so a lot of my focus has been, and my leadership at time at Peak has been expanding the impact of what we do on that national scale to get rid of the fine print underneath our mission statement. And a lot of that has been around finding other pockets of organizations, of industry, where others are really interested in what we now call disability inclusion. So it's interesting that in the scheme of all the DEI backlash and things like that in the last couple of years, and increasingly in 2025, that disability inclusion still stands. Disability is governed by different laws, right? It's governed by the ADA. And it's always really important for us to recognize that the challenges that individuals with disabilities face and the barriers to employment are very specific to individuals with disabilities. So when we think about the different types of industries that are interested in what we do, it's often it does include government all around the country, not just in Texas, but it also includes some really, really large household names that are committed as corporations to this concept of disability inclusion. But where we come in is that they might have these goals in their regular workforce around we want to be more inclusive of people with disabilities, have greater disability or disabled representation in our general group of employees. But what people don't often realize is that in really large corporations, there's a second workforce that's present, which is temporary employees. It's the contingent workforce. So that's where we have found a really, really good set of partners within that corporate space who recognize that there's a disconnect right now, which is that they might have a commitment from a corporate standpoint to hiring more people with disabilities, but their contingent workforce does not have that same focus right now. So that's where we come in with a very, very specialized area of expertise, right? We say, hey, that's what we do. That's what we've been doing for more than 30 years. And so that's really laid the stage for us to grow on a national level and to offer more opportunities for people in more markets who have disabilities.
Yeah. Well, I alluded to something that it's an approach that you call talent without limits. Can you unpack what that is?
Yes, absolutely. Talent Without Limits has been a total pet project for 2025. It's something that we've dreamed of for a while, of being able to take the messaging of not just what we do, but actually the people who are impacted through the work that we do, and their lives and their stories. And we've been able to capture those stories with very, very brave individuals who are willing to put themselves out there, not just as a person with a disability, but to tell their story of their life, of their disability, of their work. And we produce these video segments and different content around there, featuring those individuals. And one of my favorite things about them is that these videos are not infomercials. I think we can all agree that'd be really cringy. Like that, just like a sales pitch. Ugh, yuck. But this isn't about peak, actually. The Talent Without Limits series and that whole initiative for us is around recognizing and elevating the stories of the individuals themselves who are employed. We have wonderful people who we have highlighted. One of my favorites that we've done this year is a woman named Cindy who lives in upstate New York, who is living with cancer. And she's under treatment, but she's a cancer lifer. That was her diagnosis. And her story of what matters to her as an individual, how she gets the strength to do what she does every day, which includes going to work, even though she could live on Social Security benefits, right? She would qualify for those because of her cancer condition. But she finds purpose in going to work. And she finds purpose in helping others learn how to live with a terminal diagnosis and to continue to get up in the morning and feel like there's a reason for them to be here and to help other people. And there's just so much power in a story like that that I think is an important part of humanizing individuals that we're talking about. Because when we talk about a collective, any kind of collective, but if we talk about the disabled community as a whole, it's hard for us to imagine individuals within that. So Talent Without Limits is really about bringing the stories to light of those individuals who are very, very brave for sharing their stories in such an open way.
Yeah, I just love the fact that you are giving them purpose, because there's so much talent out there in the community that is, the disability community, that is untapped. There's so much potential there that we have to look at and investigate who these people are and bring them into the fold. It reminds me of my own example of somebody that found his purpose was in a hospital setting many, many years ago. I worked as an HR person, And nobody would hire him because, well, he was born with a disability from the waist down, and on top of that, he was a minority. Um, and so we took him in the HR department as an intern, and then we started to discover how talented this kid was with technology. He was a brilliant programmer, and then the more work we gave him, the more he started to just produce amazing things for us. Developing apps and websites, things like that. And so naturally, we hired him full time.
Mhm.
I remember him coming to me one time and he thanking me for hiring him, bringing him as part of the team. But he says, "I have now found my purpose in life."
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that just, like, swelled my heart when I heard
Mhm.
that, right? To for somebody that has probably, beat trying to beat down so many doors and have heard so many no's,
Mhm.
to now all of a sudden here he is, right? He's exhibiting his gifts and talents and producing amazing things. So that's
Mhm.
kind of my story of one example many, many years ago, and you have hundreds of those that come your way, daily. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. All right, as we wind down here, is there any question that I should have asked but I did not that our listeners need to know?
Well, I'm sure that everyone is curious about AI and how that could affect the work of organizations like us. I feel like that's a mandatory topic these days, even though we're all kind of sick of it at times. We still have to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not something that's just going to go away. Um, so I think that that's an important thing for us to talk about, especially in a world like recruiting, which is very language based. So things like large language models, right? The LLMs like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, that they have so much disruptive power when it comes to recruiting. And one of the things that I read about a lot these days is that there's this sort of like the bots are applying to jobs and then the bot resumes are being screened by other bots. And it's like, where are the humans in this? It's just bots talking to bots. Sometimes when we look at, AI optimization tools, and we all know that AI can hallucinate, that's one of the limitations of the technology. Um, Sometimes I look at those things and I go, where's the truth in
Mm,
all of this, though? If we're using AI to summarize something and then AI is being used to read that summary, how far have we deviated from the original source, from
yeah.
the original truth?
Yeah.
So that's something that we are very cognizant of at Peak. We are actually in the process of doing a formal AI rollout here because we want to make sure that our recruiters here continue to be adding this skill set to their repertoire as recruiters. So we're doing things like workshops in the next quarter for all of our groups across the organization on how they can use things like ChatGPT to to work smarter. But we keep three things as the focus. One is creativity, right? We don't want to bog things down so much with policy or you can and can't do this, but creativity is the shining light here. So we're creative in terms of what kinds of new ways can we approach a problem? What kinds of new ways can we leverage technology to come up with, large analysis of data done just quickly? But the balance is that there also has to be accuracy, right? We have to be committed to where is the truth and be aware of the limitations of either the data that we've fed to the LLM or the data that we're getting out of it. And then the third part is responsibility, because in recruiting and in staffing, and in especially what we do, we deal with so much sensitive information that we have to make sure that our teams are very well educated on how they can and can't use information. So it's really finding the perfect balance of those three.
Mm.
And those are the three tenets of how we adopt AI as an organization.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. We bring it home with two questions, as we do with every guest. The first one is tradition on the show. It's the leading with love question. I always have to say it with a manly voice, right? Leading with love. So, how do I lead my team with, and we're talking about practical, actionable love and care day in and day out?
Mm. Yes, I love that question so much. Speaking of love, I go back to, because I'm a storyteller, tell a little story. Um, I go back to when I had not been in this business that long. And we used to have people come into our office to interview with us. That meant that they were sitting out in our lobby, right? So they'd be sitting there and we had a very open space. So you could hear if someone was on the phone in the bullpen part of the office, you could hear if you were sitting in the lobby waiting for your interview appointment. And so that was something that we always had to be mindful of, that the way that you are talking about someone else right now, there could be someone else listening to that and going, is that how they're going to be talking about me? So we are always aware of treating individuals with respect when you're interacting with them right in their face or on the phone or something directly, but also if that individual were sitting out in your lobby and they heard you talking like this, how would they feel? So it's become a core part of our culture over the years here, is making sure that even when someone's not present, that we are being respectful of them as a human, as an individual, just fundamentally a person who is worth respect, because we all are. And I think that that is sort of the foundation of approaching each other with love. And that's the type of attitude and mindset that can permeate an organization.
So good. All right, bring us home. What's that one thing you want people to take away from this conversation?
Well, I hope that everyone has been challenged a little bit in their own definitions of a disability and what it is and what it isn't. One of the powerful things about the world of disability is that unlike any other protected class, you or I could wake up tomorrow with a disability. I could leave my office here and get in a car accident, and suddenly I have a different disability. So when it's the ultimate embodiment of empathy, I think, because it's not just about how something impacts others, but it's also putting yourself, like the true definition of empathy is imagining yourself in their shoes, not just sympathy, which is why I feel so sorry for you, but really feeling the experience as though you were them. And I think that that is the foundation of good leadership, of approaching others with love and with respect, but also of thinking about how we can design workforces and organizations to be more inclusive. It's not just about other people. It's about that empathetic approach of, if I were in this person's shoes, how would I want to be treated? So I think that's the most important takeaway for anyone in any disability conversation, is that it's not something that happens to other people or challenges other people face. It's things that benefit all of us to be aware of organizationally.
Well stated. Bree, this has been a great conversation. I mean, you have so much wisdom and knowledge, and we are grateful and better for it. So really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here.
Yeah. So tell us, can people connect with you, learn more about you personally, and then tell us about Peak Performers. Where can they find them?
Absolutely. Our website, peakperformers.org, which is also where we have all of our open jobs that are posted. If you want to refer someone, if you want to connect with us as an organization, as an employer, you can do all of that on there. We also have our Talent Without Limits series that is hosted on our site. We just built out its own dedicated page under our navigation, so feel free to check that out. Also, we love it when those videos are shared around, so feel free to do that. But we also have a very active LinkedIn presence. We are the Peak Performers staffing agency that is headquartered in Austin, so that's how you can find us on LinkedIn.
And check all those links right below in the show notes, folks. All right. So, hey, if your organization is ready to unlock untapped talent, visit peakperformers.org. That's peak, P-E-A-K, performers.org, to learn how their Talent Without Limits model can strengthen your team. All right. For Bree Sarlati and yours truly, remember, in the end, love wins. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, The future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your leadership and business flourish.